A warmer friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got a tremendous podcast for you as in segment number 2, we're going to be joined by the bracketeer himself as Rocco Miller is going to be aboard. He does absolutely amazing work taking a look at the game of college basketball. I know that he's been helping set up a lot of these non-conference schedules, a lot of these non-conference games in general that are going to have a lot of juice with them, so we're going to be diving in on that in segment number 2. How can he tell some of these teams that might have NCAA tournament aspirations based on their scheduling? Who are some teams that have put themselves in good position to be able to have some success this season with the way that they have been scheduling as well? We're also going to be taking a look at the two Big 12 teams that are reeling a little bit with West Virginia now being without Jose Perez and also Kansas letting go of Arterio Morris. What does that mean for both of those two teams? Really a lay of the land with regards to Big 12 as there's a few sleeper teams that he's going to be pointing out. A few of them are in the Big 12. I know that there's a few teams from the American that he thinks are worth watching as well. So we're going to be chatting about that here in segment number 2. In segment number 1, we didn't get a lot of news and notes on Sunday, but I do have a little bit to polish up with regards to a team that I thought was really going to rise in the SWAC, being without a big cog. We're going to be taking a look at that in segment number 1. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my X timeline at GN_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, maybe does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way, that is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Please do send in those questions because we're getting closer and closer to the start of the college basketball season. We are just 5 weeks away, and for this school, they are dreading the fact that they're going to have to make some impromptu plans as Jackson State thought that they were getting former Ole Miss starter and a guy that was legitimately a top 75 recruit in Daeshun Ruffin in the fold. Daeshun Ruffin announced on his Instagram feed a few days ago, I believe it was on September 28th to be exact, that he is not going to be able to play this year due to injury. He did not mention what the injury was. We are all questioning whether or not it was part of that issue that kept him off the floor quite a bit last year in SEC play as he was dealing with a bit of a hand issue, but he is not going to be partaking for Jackson State this year, and it does leave Jackson State in a little bit of a tough situation as Mo Williams brought him in, also brought in Jordan O'Neal to be able to revamp what was a bunch that was able to make a little bit of noise last year. They went on the road, they knocked off SMU, they stayed within 10 points against both Mississippi State and against Michigan. They were showing some really nice fight. You could tell that they just needed that one guy to be able to get them over the top, and I thought that it was going to be Daeshun Ruffin, especially if he could show what he did during his freshman year at Ole Miss. It was a small 14-game sample size, but 12.5 points, 3.5 assists, 2.3 steals per contest. Not a guy that lights it up from three-point range at 5'9", but a guy that could really maneuver out there in the SWAC. That lack of size will be mitigated quite a bit more just because he does have really good shiftiness, has really good wheels, and I thought that he was going to be absolutely tremendous for Jackson State, and now they're going to be reeling a little bit. They do bring back quite a bit of production from last season, so you're able to feel good there, and I do think that Mo Williams has been able to do some very nice work for the team in general, but with Jackson State, I do think that while they're still going to be a pretty rock-solid team out there in the SWAC, I was personally thinking that they were going to be the number 1 team, and that does affect the way that I look at them a little bit. Top scorer from last year, Ken Evans, he's going to need to really step up because now with having out of the fold Daeshun Ruffin, you're probably looking at Chase Adams once again running the point, which he did a very solid job last year. He's not a guy that's necessarily going to give you a lot of scoring, but is able to do a good job just throwing out the ball, what have you. But this also hurts them from a depth perspective as well. You're going to need someone like a 6'6" Zeke Cook to be able to give you some good production as well. So very much something to be watching out for, and these are the sorts of things I'm looking for here in the offseason. Now that the transfer portal period is done, now that we've got a lot of that taken care of, taking a look at these teams that they're going to be affected by these two-time transfers, whether or not they're going to be getting waivers or not. And that's something that I'm going to be bringing up with our good friend Rocco in segment number 2 as well. But also just taking a look at how he's taking a look at these schedules, how that really shows where a team is at in general with how they think that they're going to be doing this year. Some of the teams that he is bullish on coming into the season. So we're going to have a nice wide-ranging chat with Rocco next right here on Cusco Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast.
Are you ready to become a winning sports bettor? Schedule a call with SBIA to find out how their service can make you a long-term winning player. They've developed an innovative algorithm that maximizes units return, and they are so confident in their system that they offer a money-back guarantee. Sign up by October 31st and get their MBA package at no cost until they reach 10 net units. They treat sports betting like a business. So if you want to learn how to make your sports betting dreams a reality, visit them at SBIA1.com and check them out on social media at SBIA Sports.
And we're back to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is always great to be joined by this man, as he is the bracketeer himself, Rocco Miller. He does absolutely amazing work taking a look at the game of college basketball. He's been hard at work researching so many of these teams, helping out with scheduling, and now that we are just over a month away, 5 weeks until college basketball gets started, Rocco is hard at work. I know that he is starting to do some of his projections, starting to do his preseason bracketology. Now that we're getting more clarity, though, obviously we still have some moving parts, and you're able to follow all of his work on Twitter/X at Rocco Miller, the number 8 altogether. And Rocco, it's great to have you aboard. Thank you.
Greg, I can't believe it. It's October as we record this. 1 month away from the ball actually being tipped for real. Looking forward to getting out to a few practices this week and the next few weeks to start seeing these teams up close, see what they're working on, try to find some hidden gems for everybody else out there that follows along. And great to be back on the show with you.
It is great to have you aboard. And Rocco, what I think is so interesting about all that you do is that you help out a lot of these teams, a lot of these coaches, what have you, with regards to scheduling. And when it comes to just what you do with regards to scheduling, how much does that give you a little bit of an idea as to who's going to be relatively solid, some of the sleepers, and what teams might be disappointing a little bit this year? Because we know that every team does their scheduling a little bit differently, and there are some teams that they go out there and they want a murderer's row on their schedule, and typically when it comes to more of your first year, second year coaches, they want a few layup games to be able to get some confidence in their new tenure at a new school.
It helps tremendously. Getting the opportunity to speak to, somebody on the staff at most programs, especially the programs that are going to be in contention for at-large bids, helps a lot, because as the scheduling process unfolds, typically it's a large hierarchy of the who's who of college basketball in terms of leagues or in terms of blue bloods. They typically have the pick of the litter of who they want to play against, where, what makes sense for them strategically. If you're a Duke or a Michigan State or even a Baylor, USC, or a UCLA, you're probably going to want to play anywhere between 4 to 6 more key games, and then they fill the rest of the schedule with home games, which even within those home games, there's a little bit of a variety of the types of teams they want to play, whether it's different styles or just go for straight wins. We saw UConn, for example, fill their home schedule with about the most bottom D1 teams you can think of, with teams like Mississippi Valley State and Quinnipiac go in there this year. But a lot of teams actually prefer, like the Alabamas of the world, they want to play teams that are at least quad 3 or better to make those opportunities meaningful, to help their team get better. A lot of teams like to mix their schedule up with different styles. One night might play a slow tempo team, next night play a up tempo team, try to take on teams that have a star player or two. Anything you can do to get yourself ready for your league, I think, is smart. And I think if you're a projected team to be near that bubble, or you think you can play your way onto the bubble, then I think you have to be extra careful about who you play. And so through that whole process, myself and these various staffs, we will constantly be talking about a variety of teams. Every day it's a little bit different conversation. But for me, it's having all these different perspectives about how good a certain team may or may not be, having my own opinion about it coming in. But obviously that's a constant work in progress. Even to today, I'm still kind of checking in with coaches and people in the industry about where they think a team might be, or if a certain player I'm not as familiar with is going to be a quality contributor and what to look out for. So with 362 teams, Greg, it's a constant evolution that never ends. And I actually start to panic when we get to opening night because I'm like, oh no, all of my research is over now. We have to start playing games, and there's never enough time, is my point.
Oh, there never is enough time, because just when you think you have everything figured out too, it's like, gosh, I need to reevaluate this team. They might be a little bit better than expected. They might be a little bit worse than expected as well. I have 362 D1 teams like we do this year. Last year was actually 363. There's just no way you're going to be able to cross every T and dot every I, no matter how much work you put in, as Rocco Miller is one of those hardworking men that does put in those hours, and he is showing to me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that it is really interesting to take a look at this outlook, because you were just alluding to it, the variety of different schedules that we do see. And are there any mid-major teams that they really stand out in terms of the way that they schedule? Maybe it's a team that we're thinking might be sort of on the bubble and they're trying to make that push to the NCAA tournament, or maybe it's a team that's a little bit under the radar looking to make some noise this year.
Yeah, I'd say in the mid-major ranks, St. Mary's, once again, they've been a 5 seed the last 2 years, so maybe a lot of people are just getting comfortable with them being a mainstay in the NCAA tournament. But if you have a little bit more than a short-term memory, you'll know that St. Mary's has dabbled with the bubble, both on the good side and the bad side, over the last decade. Now, I do believe this year they will be closer to what they've done the last 2 years. I think they have enough to coming back. But man, what they've done from a scheduling standpoint, Randy Bennett, it took him years to kind of come around. But now they play just such an awesome schedule. Like, they fill the home games with teams that are picked to be either the champion of their league or top 3 in their league. This year they'll have Weber State in town. They'll have Missouri State, Middle Tennessee, a lot of quality mid-major teams that they still feel really good about their chances to win those games. In fact, New Mexico's coming again, a team they lost to last year. They have so many of them that they can actually afford to lose 1 or 2 like they did a year ago, and they'll have other chances throughout the schedule to prove themselves. And I like that methodology a lot better than the team that per se only has 4 or 5 real legit tests in non-league. There's 7 or 8 laughers. And you really just can't figure out how good they are, especially if they fail in those 4 or 5 opportunities, or maybe only go 1-4. So with St. Mary's, they can go 11-2 or 10-3, but within those 10 or 11 wins, they're going to have a lot of good wins, and it'll be easy to dismiss the losses like it was last year. So I'll start with that. They've kind of set the bar, in my view, for what every mid-major should strive for. And Santa Clara, right down the street, they did a great job just kind of copying St. Mary's model. If you look at Santa Clara's schedule, there's 15 games. I think upwards of 13 of those will be very meaningful. 11 of those are actually in pencil right now, quad 2 or better. I mean, Jason Ludwig, their assistant coach that I have a great relationship with, and Scott Garson, their coach Sendek, just did a tremendous job. We started talking about this a year and a half ago together about how they want to just start going for it. They've won 23 plus games the last 2 years, had lottery picks in each of the last 2 years, and really didn't get considered or looked at very closely by the NCAA committee. So I think this year they finally got fed up with that, and they're going even harder on scheduling, and a lot of credit goes to them. They'll be in an event, for example, where they'll play Oregon in the first round, and then their second game will be either Alabama or Ohio State. Tremendous national opportunity for the Broncos. Also, what Wichita State was able to do, some of it not by choice, some of it by choice. Paul Mills takes over from Oral Roberts out there in Wichita. And again, they need a perfect storm to be in that large team. Some people have them picked as low as 7th or 8th in the American, but they do have some really good upside where they could play their way up into the top 3 if everything breaks correctly. They get a chance to play 3 regional Big 12 teams that will just really ignite that fan base if they can play well. They'll play both Kansas and Kansas State and Missouri, all regional teams, all national powers. Those 3 teams were all in the NCAA tournament last year. Of course, Kansas is a national title contender year in and year out. So just getting that series back on the books is really, really huge for Shockers basketball. And then on top of that, they've got a nice series with Richmond. They'll play South Dakota State, who's one of the best mid-major teams this year coming into the year, probably the unanimous pick to win the Summit League. And they've just sprinkled some of their other opportunities with meaningful games. And that's really the depth I look for. I'm not big on the window dressing where you might play 3 or 4 big games, but then have 7 or 8 very simple, not challenging games. I like to see 9, 10, 11 really tough games where your team, if they don't play well, they can get beat. And that's what these teams have done.
Yeah, they certainly have. And I know that you were talking about the Broncos. I think that they are going to be in for a nice season as well. And we always know that St. Mary's, they book those games just so well. They always try to do a good job of being able to sprinkle in there a couple neutral court games, feels like every single year. They play a few games out there in Arizona. So I think that those are a few teams that are going to be able to do a nice job of being able to build themselves up for the upcoming season. As Rocco Miller, he does a great job over on his website, bracketeer.org, does a great job taking a look at the game of college basketball. And he's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that it is going to be interesting to take a look at all these teams and their scheduling. And something else that is going to be of intrigue is what we did see over the weekend with regards to the Big 12. The Big 12, as we know, a lot of these teams do a pretty solid job of scheduling, and then once you get in season, you used to back in the day get that double round robin. Not going to be having as much of that this year, but still a very brutal conference. But we did see West Virginia lose a member of their team in Jose Perez. We saw Arterio Morris out of the fold for Kansas, and we'll start with Kansas before going into West Virginia. But what do you make out of Arterio Morris being out of the fold for Kansas? Because their consensus at minimum top 5 team. Most people had them in their top 3, and I certainly did. And while I think that Kansas is going to be able to absorb this blow, I think it's a big deal. And we were talking about mid-majors. I thought a big loss this offseason was the fact that UC Santa Barbara, they've lost Zach Clements, who we thought was going to redshirt at Kansas. I think that plan might need to be readjusted a little bit for Kansas, because now I think Clements might need to play for Kansas as a result of the Morris situation.
The Morris situation, it's unfortunate. Hopefully he can put his life together, coming out of all this from a personal level. But I think Kansas is, to me, compared to most rosters, very deep. I think this will maybe make them a little bit more freshman dependent than anything. But again, these are Kansas level freshmen. These are very talented kids. And I think El Marco Jackson, for example, is penciled in as a starter to open the season. This might open the door for Jamari McDowell to play some more time. He's equivalent size as Morris, a 6'4" freshman coming in. But I think, you look at the experience that they brought in, and guys like Nick Timberlake from Towson and Parker Brown from over here at Santa Clara, Christian Brown's brother, they'll fill in nicely as guys off the bench to bring them big time experience. You have DeJuan Harris, Hunter Dickinson, Kevin McCure. This is a loaded team. Obviously, losing Morris has its percentage of damage to the overall outlook, but it really won't sway me too much on what Kansas' ceiling is, just based on the fact that they can plug in another extremely talented guy, and let's say it is McDowell in this case, or maybe they just go with bigger lineups because they do have quite a bit of height on their bench, like a Clements as well, to go along with 6'10" Brown, who can play the perimeter. I've seen him play a ton of times. So just the fact that Morris wasn't a starter, I'm not super concerned about it. Now on the West Virginia side, obviously Perez has been waiting 2 years to get on the court. West Virginia had that unfortunate fallout with the Bob Huggins situation, which really did hit the roster. They have an inexperienced interim head coach taking over on the fly. And I do think the Big 12, just being a 14-team league and so many of these teams being top 75 good, top 50 good, I think West Virginia is really drifting towards the bottom of the league, in my view. With or without the Perez news, I was already kind of getting there in my mind. The Perez news just hurts a little bit more. I am anxious to see Raekwon Battle get a lot of minutes. So hopefully for his sakes, he has a really nice individual year. But I just think this team, from a team standpoint, is really going to be hurting a little bit depth-wise. And I think, unfortunately for Josh Eilert, he may get out-coached quite a bit in this league. I would hope to be wrong about that from all accounts. And in my brief meetings with him, he seems like an unbelievable rising star in the coaching industry. But this is just a tough hand to be dealt here in his first year.
Oh, I am right there with you. I do want to see very good things for this just entire team because they have been through a lot. But you did bring up Raekwon Battle, and is there any fear that he might not be able to get out there on the court this year? Because I know that he's a two-time transfer, and we've been seeing a lot of these two-time waivers be very interesting, to say the least, because I do know that with George Mason, they were able to get a few of their guys out there on the court. Woody Newton, I believe 2 weeks ago, he was able to get his waiver approved, and we've seen a few others, including West Virginia and Omar Silviero, get his denied as well. And this is a big question mark when it comes to gauging a lot of these teams, and it's one that we still really don't have a lot of answers to because a lot of these are still pending.
Yeah, exactly. I would actually err on the side of caution on a lot of these. I've talked to enough coaches here in the last couple of weeks. There's a lot of concern. The vast majority, much like football, will be denied. Now, I think in a case like Battle, I'm not sure if he's finishing up here to get his degree. It's his 5th college year coming up. I don't have a status update on that part, so that would be an angle for him to get eligible either way. But I think assuming he's still an undergrad, yeah, that's certainly a huge one for them. We've also got Quinn Slazinski coming over from Iona. There's a ton of examples, not just at West Virginia, but all over the country. And that's certainly going to reshuffle the deck in some of these projections based on who's in and who's out. Those decisions, I think, are going to trickle in throughout October. Each week is just going to be a constant evaluation. That's going to be the equivalent of the season starting a month early, just trying to figure out who's going to be even part of a rotation and who's not. On top of that, you've got like some significant injuries that have been coming out. Like we saw the big one at UConn lately. And I think and Xavier's going, with Fremantle probably not playing at all this year. I mean, there's some big injury news coming out that I've heard some rumors at Gonzaga that Graham Ike could be out quite a while. A lot of stuff like that that's also going to shape the projections by the time I put mine out, at least.
Yep, there's going to be a lot of moving parts with regards to these two-time transfers. Hopefully a lot of these guys are able to get out there on the court, but it certainly is something to watch out for the next few weeks as Rocco Miller, he does great work over at Bracketeer.org, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Rocco, this is that time that I always love to ask you about this because I know you do a great job gauging all 362 D1 teams over the last few weeks, whether it be via scheduling, whether it be via diving in a little bit more, since I know that you've been starting up your projections and you're working very hard to get your preseason bracketology out there. Has there been a team or two that, as you've been researching, you're starting to feel a little bit more bullish about?
Oh, there's tons of them, yeah. So the one that I can't unstick myself from, just looking at the bubble picture and trying to figure out which teams are penciled into that 40 to 55 range. Typically the top 46 or so teams in the country you get inside what we call the cut line. The cut line is where the next team down would be in the NIT. So typically that falls in the mid 40s. A team I just can't unstick myself from is Cincinnati. I see a lot of projections out there with the Bearcats at or near the bottom of the Big 12. From a lot of my conversations and a lot of my own, analysis of this roster, it's a very experienced roster. Obviously some moving parts coming in and some grad transfers. They'll need some help the waiver process themselves. But I really like the talent coming into this Cincinnati program. Assuming that West Virginia does fall out of the tournament picture, I think somebody from the Big 12 is going to benefit from that. I think it's a team like a Cincinnati or a BYU. They're the two I'm looking at the most closest. I think BYU, my concern there is Quest Glover, moving on to a different school. I was really counting on him to be a big part of that picture. I'm still kind of massaging and trying to figure out where to put BYU. Cincinnati's one where I talked to several coaches who didn't want to play them. A lot of respect for the types of guys they brought in to go along with, Victor Locken coming back and some of their experience under Wes Miller. Wes Miller's kind of, entering that year now, his third year, where it's time to make a move, even though he's jumping up to the Big 12. I also thought Cincinnati in the last 2 months of last season, they were actually performing, if you check the Torvik, day by day rankings, the last 2 months of the season, they were performing as a top 25 team. They lost 3 or 4 heartbreakers, in the last couple minutes of the season. They were the only, I think, 3 or 4 losses the entire last month and a half. So I think there's a lot of great program momentum there that not getting discussed enough. So that one's sticking with me. I think on a lower level, just super sleeper. I might have mentioned them on a previous show, but East Carolina, I love what they've done with the roster. I think Schwartz is an underrated coach. He's got a really difficult job in the league, but with the league kind of getting a refresh, it's a great opportunity for the Pirates to reestablish themselves in this new AAC. I don't think there's any doubt about it that FAU and Memphis are the best 2 teams, but I do think there's a mad dash for those 3 to 6 spots. And East Carolina could play themselves in there. I think UAB and Tulane are probably the ones to go with for 3 and 4. But between North Texas and Wichita State and East Carolina, and maybe if things break right, SMU or South Florida, there's a lot of teams, fighting to get into that top 5. Almost every coach I've talked to has got a lot of respect for this East Carolina team. I don't like the way they scheduled per se, because they have I think out of 13 non-conference games, 11 are at home. That could work both ways. That could give them a lot of confidence. They have a special game against the Florida Gators down in Lakeland, Florida, which obviously would be a pro Gators crowd, but I think it's a good test for them in December. And then their only road game is at George Mason. So I think they can enter the American Conference with a great record. Just keep your eyes on the Pirates.
Absolutely. And out there in that conference as well, I've got to give a little bit of an ode to good friend Lane Kiffin. Go Rice Owls, as I think that they could have a really nice year, as well as Max Fiedler. Just his ability at 6'11" to dole out like 5 assists per game last season. That's something that I think the American is going to have a very tough time defending against. And to your point about East Carolina, bringing in the likes of Bobby Pettiford and company, I really do like the upward trajectory there. I think that they can get into the middle of the conference this year, and then perhaps next year they take that big, giant leap forward. And this man is always taking big, giant leaps forward. As Rocco, you do amazing work over there at Bracketeer.org. You're getting set for what is going to be an amazing college basketball season. I know that you're putting together your preseason bracketology, some of your projections now that most of the scheduling work that is done, though. As we know, with an independent out there like Chicago State, they're probably going to be booking some games later on during the season as well. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Appreciate that, Greg. You can follow me on Twitter /X at Rocco Miller 8, as Greg said at the start of the show. My website is bracketeer.org. We are working hard right now on preseason content. There'll be 2 major publications coming out. One will be the one-bid leagues, which are the more than likely 22 to 23 leagues that will forecast as a one-bid league for the coming season. But each league will have a preseason champion for both the regular season and the tournament, which are 2 very different dynamics. So we love to delineate who we expect to win the regular season title and the tournament title. In a lot of leagues, I think the most interesting thing is you'll find that those are 2 different teams, much like they are as the real season plays out. Then the other piece will be the multi-bid leagues, which will have its own breakdown of teams to watch for the bubble. And then the last piece, of course, will be the actual preseason bracket, which is an accumulation of all 32 league breakdowns and breaking it down line item by line item so everybody can see exactly how far in or how far out your favorite team might be. Don't worry, we don't hate any of your teams. It's just a starting point. Some of these we'll be able to laugh at by the end of the year.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about trying to get more hits than misses, because we're going to have our hits, we're going to have our misses. That's the way that college basketball goes. That's the way things go in general when you got 362 D1 teams. Rocco always does a great job with his analysis, always does a great job on the bracketology front, and just being a part of this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. So big thanks to Rocco for joining me. I'm Coach Soup, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coach Soup, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, do have one of 2 ways we'll fire those in. First one is my old X timeline at GN_41. Keep in mind, letters CM. Name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'll be with you guys every single day on this podcast. We're down to just 4 conference previews now. The Big 12, the Big East, along with the Pac-12 and the SEC. I'm probably going to do about 1 a week moving forward, so that'll leave us about 14 days where all the conference previews are done. I'm able to dive in on all these questions that you might have, and we're going to have a successful season. Once we get in season, going to get you guys picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. Always appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm with you guys every single day, and that means I'm back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in.